Okay, good evening. Thank you to those of you who got this done quickly, and well done to those of you who went for the just rename the file. I'm sure Mr. Miller won't look inside. I did. So there were loads of very good answers to these questions. I just want to run through them very briefly, one at a time, and point you to where the answer is to be found in the text. So, question one here was, what question do we ask to establish if X is F type statement is a definition or a description? So, on this page it tells you Moore realises a definition is effectively analytic. Water is H2O, H2O is water, the bachelor is unmarried, the unmarried man is a bachelor, whereas descriptions on the other hand are synthetic. John may be clever, but we all need to do some sort of test. And so the question we're going to ask, says Moore, is it really? So if we've got a definition, we will have a closed answer. So we say water is H2O, and we say, is it really? Yes, it is actually really. Water is lead 2O. Is it really? No, it's not. So definitions always give a closed answer to the question, is it really? Whereas descriptions give an open question. So if we say John is clever, is he really? Well, maybe, depends, different subjects. So definitions closed, descriptions open, and the question that we ask is it really? So what is the difference between an open and a closed question? So a closed question has only one possible answer. So sometimes I will ask you those questions in class. I will say to you, is 5 and 5 10? And you'll say, yes. There isn't any other possible answer. That's a closed question. However, open questions have room for opinion and ideas and thoughts. So if we ask, is it really, when we have only a description, so we say John is clever, and we say, is he really? And we say, oh well, maybe not. Or we say Jack is beautiful, and you say, is he really? Well, some people say he is, some people say he isn't. Because you're describing Jack and you're describing John, you're not defining clever as being John, or Jack as being what beauty actually is. So for more, we can use this, is it really, and say, is it an open question, one with lots of possible answers, or is it a closed question, one with only one possible answer? And that will tell us whether it's a definition or a description. What is meant by the naturalistic fallacy? What is meant by the naturalistic fallacy? So, Moore suggests then that because every time you say of any possible definition of the good that's suggested, when you say is it really, and you get an open question, he says we can say then that to define the good is not possible, and any attempt to do so will be fallacious. Most attempts to define the good have been in natural terms, so we've seen utilitarians say that the good is happiness, or the maximisation of happiness, or the satisfaction of preferences. Those are natural things. We've seen Aristotle say that life is accorded of a natural ergon. So a naturalistic fallacy is the mistake of trying to define the good in natural terms. In fact, we can go further and say it's really a definitional fallacy, because to define the good at all is always a mistake. It's always impossible. What is meant by reflective equilibrium? So, under the statement, this has some arguments going through. Obviously, we've got Moore's arguments. We've got the general sense in our own thinking that we have a conscience, an ability to sort of sense the rightness or wrongness of actions. And then the reflective equilibrium is here. And it's this idea that we've all through this year, we've said things like, well, Kant says you should never tell a lie. We said, well, let's imagine a situation where we have a murderer at the door. Should we lie to that person? And we've said things like, well, it's intuitively obvious one should lie in that situation. Kant, of course, thinks it's by no means right that we should lie in that situation. We think he's intuitively obviously wrong. Well, we seem to be using an intuition there. So reflective equilibrium has been drawing upon our intuitions all the way through. we said in utilitarianism we might pick one of you and say, well, if we killed one of you and shared your organs around, then we wouldn't have a problem because everybody would have a bit more life except for one person, and so we'd be maximising happiness. But in fact, we would still say that that's intuitively, obviously wrong. So reflexive equilibrium is the use of our intuition to test our moral theories. Well, if we're using our intuition, we must be intuiting something. And then name two moral intuitionists and briefly the difference between them. Well, we've got here Moore saying that it's intuitively obvious that actions increasing happiness are the right things to do. So he's a utilitarian, but he's intuiting that we should be maximising happiness. He's not saying that happiness is the good. He's saying happiness is good. Yes, it's like saying Jonathan is handsome is different from saying Jonathan is what handsomeness is. So he intuits it. On the other hand, here we've got Pritchard, who says we intuit duties. So Moore intuits utilitarianism as being self-evident. He intuits deontology as being self-evident. And he reckoned that if you were put face to face with a moral conundrum, a moral difficulty, you would know what you ought to do if you looked at it clearly. So we can't define what you ought to do, we can't argue to what we ought to do, but put in front of something which is evidently wrong, we recognise it as being wrong. So Pritchard and Moore are both intuitionists. They both think the right action is intuitively obvious, and they actually disagree about what the action is, which might be one of the problems we could raise with this. In fact, it is one of the problems we could raise with this. And then I said we will see some very serious objections to this theory, but using the passage from Warnock and or your own thoughts, can you identify any problems with the theory? And so a few of you have. So Rowan has said, if Moore asserts that what is morally right and what is morally wrong is intuitively obvious, how do we have situations where people disagree over what is morally right? That seems a real problem there. If it's intuitively obvious, why do we disagree? Freya, I don't know which Freya, has said much the same. If everyone's morality is intuitive, why do people disagree about it so much? And you could go further than that. It's not just normal people. It's in fact within intuitionists. You had just seen Moore and Pritchard disagreeing about what's intuitively obvious as well. So I'm sure many more of you spotted some of these. I would encourage you to write them down.